You know what I think this drum loop needs, Brandon, is sleigh bells.
100%. I could hear them just jingling along there. You know, I like to think if you put sleigh bells, you could do the you know that song? You can put that to that beat.
Come on, it's lovely weather.
It's like, what an indie version of that would be, man.
You ever hear those really cool like metal versions of Carol of the Bells, or like who is it? Trans-Siberian Orchestra.
I was just gonna say Trans-Siberian Orchestra.
There's August Burns Red did
they really?
a version of it that was really good. Obviously, it was a little bit more distorted.
Oh, dude, that would be great.
Yeah,
just brutal Christmas. That's what we call it.
Brutal.
Oh, that's too funny.
Yeah, well, we made it. This is Christmas time. You know, we kicked this podcast off right around Easter.
Right.
So we've made it to the next
big one.
The next monument.
That's right.
Christian holidays.
Right. We've upgraded. We've downgraded.
We
side graded.
We've been everywhere. We've had a number of guests.
We've had a number of guests. Yeah.
Some of them great, like Carly.
Some of them not so great,
like Warren.
And I can say that if he was listening.
I can say that because he won't listen. We love Warren.
You know what we need to do? Speaking of sleigh bells, we need to tell Warren this week. He needs to start playing those sleigh bells up for get that Christmas spirit. You know,
he's great with that. In his lead singer role of
shaking a tambourine.
That tambourine. Yeah,
he's a real Mick Jagger up there.
He's got the moves. Yeah. All right. Well, we're in another new setting.
We're gonna hit every room in the church.
We're gonna hit every room in the church. Just needless to say, we've said this before. It's an active church. People are doing stuff, and you know what? Podcasting isn't a high priority.
No, apparently not. Yeah, no,
and that's fine because all we're doing is recording stuff and put it on the internet.
Right.
These are people having actual community.
These are people changing lives.
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
And I'm not that kind of person. I'm a talk about it, not do it kind of person.
Well, that's true. I mean, that marked the year mark of us actually, you know, Easter was when we started, but we started talking about the podcast.
Oh, it was like a year before.
As a prep, man, you know, you can't get this glorious setting in under a year.
No.
With that.
No, look at what we've got.
I know. Look at what the Lord has blessed us with, an abundance.
So we're going to talk about Christmas.
Right.
Because it is Christmas time. And, you know what I'm thinking here, though, is we had a little bit of a conversation about this earlier, but what is your go-to Christmas movie?
Oh, I don't even have to think about it. Hands down, it's Charlie Brown Christmas.
Charlie Brown Christmas?
It's the last movie I watch every year for a reason. Because it is, A, it's awesome. B, it's actually the guy who is Charles Schultz. Is that how I think he's Schultz?
Yeah, Charles
Schultz. Crazily enough, he's actually I think I told you this, but he's like associated with like the Church of God, like the group of churches we're with is. So I feel like I'm really, you know, being a patron, like, you know, like he's one of the saints that's gone before. So I feel like I'm really connecting with my roots there as a Church of God pastor, you know.
Can you be a good Church of God affiliate if you don't have a beagle?
No, you cannot. No, in fact, there was a time where every pastor had to be affiliated. You had to have a beagle. They didn't give you the reverend title. They just gave you a puppy, and it was just a beagle. And then there was a bird, the Woodstock, for a while there. So there's part of that, but hands down, it's Charlie Brown because as a pastor, and this is, you know, just me being probably super fundy and whatnot, like it's the only one that like legitimately quotes Christmas. And it's not even, and it's really interesting, it's not, it's the prophetic part of the Christmas story. And I think that's what's really cool is it's talking about the shepherds, you know, I think it's like Luke, it's in Luke that he quotes. And they also, I think, refer to even the book of Isaiah at one point in time too. So it's like, how many Christmas movies really, most of them have the feeling,
right? But
how many of them, you know? So that's mine. So what is yours? Yeah. What tops Jesus?
Well, let me tell you.
You better not say Die Hard.
All right, so here's the thing. So it's not Die Hard. Die Hard is not, for me, Die Hard's not a Christmas movie. I know some people would disagree with that, but
they're wrong.
But so I've lived my whole life knowing that other people don't know the truth.
This is our moment in the podcast where Tim talks about how people aren't good.
This is the moment.
Yeah.
Oh, trust me, there's more coming. The movie that I always associate with Christmas is a movie called Scrooge.
Oh, yeah.
Not okay, and I'll make sure you know which one I'm talking
Okay.
about. Not Scrooged with a D, which is Bill Murray.
We're Bill Murray's. Yeah, yeah.
Right, this
Okay.
is Scrooge, and it's got I can't think of the name of the lead actor, but it actually has Alec Guinness, who plays Obi-Wan Kenobi in the original Star Wars,
Right.
plays Marley, and it's a musical version of A Christmas Carol.
Really?
Yeah, and
I don't know that one.
yeah, it's the one that I always remembered in my mind, and the reason it always stuck out to me, it's a musical.
Right. You don't strike me as a musical guy.
Well, I'm not in a lot of senses, but like here they only use the songs sparingly.
Sure.
Or at least in my memory, in my recollection.
We go watch it. It's all one big
Just
song.
one big song. There's a song during the Ghost of Christmas Future
Okay.
where they bring him, and obviously, you know, if you haven't seen this, I'm not spoiling. Look, I'm not
Sure.
spoiling Christmas Carol for you.
Right. I think you've
Right.
watched it some form.
They
Right.
take him to the point of where he's died.
Right.
And they're having his like estate sale, and he doesn't really seem to understand what's going on. But then he starts to realize what's going on.
Sure.
But he doesn't really have an understanding that he died. And they're singing this song called "Thank You Very Much." It's the nicest thing that anyone has ever done for me. And it's kind of this upbeat song, and
Right.
it's the nicest thing that he had ever done for the people of this town was die.
Die.
And they have this parade, and they have this parade where they're taking his coffin to the
Sure.
to the churchyard and to the graveyard, and he is dancing along with them, not realizing that he is celebrating his own demise.
Sure. Yeah.
And that always stuck out to me. I always loved that song.
Sure.
Just and the way that scene was acted, and the rest of it is acted really well too. So like for me, you know, I think A Christmas Carol is the penultimate Christmas movie.
Sure.
right?
Sure. It's the one that's been remade the most by far.
Right. You know,
Muppets did it. Murray did it. You know.
which like that's fine. Like if you like those, it's great. But like for me, this is it.
That's it, yeah.
This one is it. So, so for me, it's
You love to tap dance. That's that musical coming out of you. You know, I've seen you play the bass. I see that foot
see me
tap.
grooving.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know, so that's one of the things that we do here in America, at least, where
Right.
Media is always at the ready, is we like to celebrate by spending time with family.
Sure.
And like watching movies, and
Oh, music.
people tend to get time off work. And
It's on right now.
Music, yeah.
Yeah, you know, it started after our podcast on Halloween. Like
Right.
it was just like immediately
Always
Christmas
makes-
music.
Always makes me so mad too is that we skip Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is my favorite holiday.
You know, I like to think I'm not legalistic. Like I like to think I'm pretty like full of grace in the spirit. But when it comes to like Christmas, I'm no joke. Like real legalistic, like super, not even in like a spiritual way, just in a like tradition. Like you don't play Christmas music until after Thanksgiving way, you know?
Right.
Yeah,
Well, it's a sacrament. So
it is.
So let's talk about what we're celebrating, though.
Right.
Right. So we're going to just do a quick Christmas drive-through. The story as it happened. You know, if you're unfamiliar with this, look, you can get a Bible anywhere.
Right.
Read the beginning of just about any gospel. I think the Gospel of John doesn't cover it really.
Yeah, and Mark doesn't have it at all.
Right.
Yeah, Mark doesn't have it, but Matthew and Luke especially, and John kind of does it in a roundabout way. But John starts with some real heavy theological, philosophical word talk. So
Which is why I
yeah,
love John's the most.
Yeah.
But so
he starts literally at the beginning of Jesus, which is before he's here.
Right.
You know, so yeah,
he starts at the beginning. So you got Mary and Joseph. An angel appears to Mary, tells
Mm-hmm.
Mary, like, hey, you're going to have this baby. You know, she's a virgin. And they tell Joseph not to be concerned about it. You know,
Right.
like, hey, it's going to be cool. But,
Right.
So they.
you can literally die if they find out, but it's cool. Don't worry.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Be fine. So, you know, so they're still going to get married or do get married. But she's already pregnant at this point.
Right.
And then a Roman census happens, right? And so the Roman census, this is interesting. Like we get so caught up with like a census today is such a hassle because I got to mail something into the government.
Right.
They're like, you got to pick up your belongings and travel back to your hometown.
Yeah, the place of not your family's birth. Like you got to go all the way back to your home. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So they have to go to Bethlehem, and that's where Jesus is born. And of course, we hear the stories. There's no room in the inn. He's,
Right.
You know, laid to rest. He's laid not to rest. He's laid in a manger. You know,
Which is, hey, total tie, lay to rest. Some people say that the manger was kind of like a stone, like a stone structure, like a almost like a cave. Yeah. So in some, what a tie if that would be. Dang.
Ooh. All right. So yeah, just a little.
That's on our conspiracy podcast. Yeah.
All right. So then angels visit some shepherds and tell them, hey, the Messiah is being born. So there's this great host that like is singing the praises of God. So the shepherds come and they visit, and this is kind of around that time of the birth.
Right.
Now, after 40 days, Mary has to travel to the temple in Jerusalem. So a lot of traveling here.
Right.
And she has to go there for purification per the law. So there they sacrificed 2 doves, which also shows that this was not a wealthy family.
Right.
So
100%.
So this is a poor family that has to do quite a bit of traveling that Jesus was born into. And while they're there in Jerusalem, Simeon gets to hold Jesus and prophesies about the Holy Spirit.
Right.
Anna, the prophetess, also sees him during this time. And then they return to Bethlehem where they stay for a while. And this could be up to 2 years.
Right.
So while they're there in Bethlehem, this is when the Magi come and they arrive.
Right.
So
later. They're not there on the night.
they're not there on the
They
night.
see the star on the night, and that's what creates it. Yeah.
Practically, how could they have been?
Right.
They see the star.
Right.
And they follow the star.
Right.
But if the star was from that night, like
That's the first time they see it. Right.
this is a cross-country trip.
100%. Yeah.
So they've got a ways to go. So they get there and they find Herod, and they tell Herod why they're there. And then they realize, oh, Herod's not to be trusted.
Right.
And so they find Jesus, and Herod wants them to come to him on their way back.
Right.
And say, tell me where you found him.
Right.
And they're like, that's a bad idea. So they just leave.
They just leave. Yeah.
And then because of this, Herod then commands the death of all children under 2 in Bethlehem.
Right.
Right. So, and Jesus obviously escapes that. So,
Yep.
so this was, there was quite a bit of time that could have passed since the birth of Christ. And so Joseph is warned by an angel that this is going to happen.
Right.
And they flee to Egypt.
Yep.
Yeah. So they end up spending some time in Egypt. And then after the death of Herod, they return to Nazareth, which was their original hometown, which fulfills the prophecy that Jesus would be called a Nazarene.
Right.
Right. So that's kind of the story as it happens. Then from there, Jesus grows up.
Right.
And he becomes who he
becomes Jesus. And
right. Like, I guess he always was Jesus.
Right. Well, that's John's point.
Yeah. In the beginning, he was the Word, and he was with God. Right. So that's the story in a nutshell. Any important parts that I left out, or anything that really?
No, I think you did a good job. Yeah. I mean, that's the whole story. Yeah.
That's pretty much it. Okay, we can wrap it up.
That's cool. There's the Christmas podcast for you guys. That's right.
That's Christmas. All right. So one of the last things I said, though, is that there was a prophecy that said that Jesus would be called a Nazarene.
Right.
That the Messiah would be called a Nazarene.
Right.
So there are several, more than several, really, but I've only got a handful here to read from, of prophecies from the Old Testament.
Sure.
Now, what's interesting about this, we've talked about this before on the show, is people think of the Bible as a singular book.
Right.
That like one person sat down and wrote from beginning to end.
Right.
But that's not what happened.
No, not at all.
It's a collection of books and stories and writings that occurred over thousands of years.
Oh, for sure.
Right. So these prophecies all occurred somewhere. You were giving me this number earlier. It's like somewhere like 500 to 600 years at minimum.
Yeah.
Before the birth of Jesus.
Yeah. If you look at like Isaiah and Jeremiah and places like that, it's at least like 500 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So these things were well before Jesus was born.
Oh, for sure.
And the people of Israel knew these prophecies.
This is today for Jews who still do not believe that Jesus is the Messiah. Mm-hmm. Like this is the whole life. I mean, this is after basically up until the point of like David and Solomon, because that's where things are good for Israel. And once it goes really downhill from there, this is all that Israel's been hoping for
salvation.
Centuries, Yeah. So this every good Jewish man and woman knows these prophecies.
Right. All right. So Isaiah 7:14 through 16. Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and she will name him Emmanuel. He will eat curds and honey at the time he knows enough to, at that time, excuse me, he will eat curds and honey at the time he knows enough to refuse evil and choose good. For before the body knows enough to refuse evil and choose good, the land whose two kings you dread will be abandoned.
Right.
So there's a little bit of political understanding too of what kind of
sure.
what's happening there. But like this is a prophecy that was fulfilled.
Right.
Right. Or that's the claim.
Right.
Is that this is what happened. Micah 5:2 says, "But as for you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, too little to be among the clans of Judah. From you one will come forth to me to be ruler in Israel. His times of coming forth are from long ago, from the days of eternity."
Right.
So kind of calling on the things that John spoke about, like
Right.
before anything. And even Jesus is that before Abraham, I am.
Right. Yeah.
You know, so, but they mentioned Bethlehem specifically here. And here's something interesting. There's two Bethlehem.
Right.
And this calls out a specific Bethlehem,
Bethlehem,
which
right.
is the Bethlehem where Jesus was.
Right. And the smaller of the Bethlehems.
The smaller one.
The lesser important, which
It's like Paris, Texas.
right. Exactly. Yeah. From Paris. Yeah. Texas. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly right. Yeah.
All right. Psalm 72, 9 through 10. May the nomads of the desert bow before him, and his enemies lick the dust. May the kings of Tarshish and of the islands bring gifts. May the kings of Sheba and Seba offer tributes. So again, this is kind of a reference to the wise men.
Yeah.
You know.
Not only that, I did a sermon on this. I don't even long time ago. One of the admins, we were talking about prophecies, and this is one that's really interesting because what are given, the gifts that are given, are real. I mean, gold is from anywhere, but it has to be from somewhere rich. And so Tarshish is actually a well-known place from the story, obviously, of Jonah.
Yeah.
You know, and part of the reason why he's fleeing to Tarshish is because of their extreme wealth and the things that each of the Magi brings kind of coincides with these ideas of island, like tropical, like, you know, like they're not like inland, they're on the coastlines, they're wealthy. So it's really interesting that those would be the gifts. It wasn't just like, hey, we brought Pokemon cards, you know what I mean? Like they brought specific things, you know.
This is a gold-plated Charizard.
Right. Oh man. Jesus would get a good dollar return on that one. Yeah.
What'd you get in your stocking, Jesus? Hologram Pikachu.
Yeah. Which is really interesting too, right? Because think about that, like you said earlier, Jesus' family was not wealthy.
No.
By no means. I mean, as far as we know, we do know his dad was a carpenter, like his earthly father was a carpenter. So, and he learned that trade from him. And what we kind of gather from Jesus' ministry is he wasn't the kind of carpenter that had a shop that people, like he was the kind of carpenter that made things to sell because he had to make ends meet.
Right.
You know what I mean? So he was the kind of carpenter that worked on job sites. You know, he wasn't like the the key toy maker at what is that? What is the Rudolph? You know what I mean? The guy the guy who's always mad at the dentist, the one that he wasn't Jesus wasn't that guy, you know. Right. So I think it's also important to note that the things that come from Tarshish and the things that he gets are only gifts worthy of a king, by the way.
Yes.
So
well, and that's the thing. Like they why would they travel if this person wasn't incredibly important?
Super important. Right.
All right. 2 Samuel 7, 12 through 13 says, "When your days are finished and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your descendant after you, who will come from you, and I will establish his kingdom. Mm-hmm. He shall build a house for my name and will establish the throne of his kingdom forever." Now, this is a prophecy about Jesus' lineage.
Right.
Right. And we see that, I think it's Matthew does the lineage.
Right. All the way. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so what we see is that Jesus fulfills this as well, that he is from the line of David.
David. Yep. And
then Jeremiah 23, 5 through 6 says, "Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will raise up for David a righteous branch." Mm-hmm. I love that branch is capitalized there.
Yeah.
"And he will reign as king and act wisely and do justice and righteousness in the land. In his days, Judah will be saved and Israel will live securely. And this is his name by which he will be called, the Lord our righteousness." So there's a lot here about what Jesus does and will do, but again, it's indicating that he comes from the line of David.
Right. Right. And it talks a lot of, it's not in this passage, but there's talk of like the stump of Jesse. So like,
Yeah.
so like they get specifically to say, cause David has kids, Solomon has lots of kids,
Yeah.
and then things get more chaotic from there, and so they bring it back in to say this is the branch that it comes out of, which is again for people who don't understand, like Jesus is a big deal because he's not just a dude. There's so many specifics that go into him. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
into just his birth, let alone all the other stuff he does. So yeah.
Yeah, this is a thing that people miss. It's like, oh, it's a good story, but there are some things here that are like record keeping and verifiable things that we understand about his lineage.
Oh, 100%. I like to think of it in terms of Star Wars.
Sure. If he doesn't think of anything,
I mean, obviously, Anakin Skywalker, same thing, virgin birth, right? I mean, sorry, I just watched these. That's why this is fresh in my mind.
It's so wild when they do that.
I know, right? But that's you know what they're totally playing on, right? He's the balancer of the Force. Anakin is like, he's going to bring balance to the Force. He's the savior, blah, 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 blah. Like, okay, hey, that's cool. He fulfilled one prophecy. The thing is, Jesus had hundreds of prophecies he fulfilled. Right. And I think in his birth alone, I can't remember the exact thing, but it's in like the 20 to 30 range, maybe even higher. So it's not like, oh, he did one thing, like, oh, he was born of a virgin. No, he's born of a virgin from this line in this town at this time. Like there's just a million things.
So does that make Rey from the
new versions?
new
Yeah.
sequels, does that make her like the Gentiles? Because she gets grafted into the vine of Skywalker.
Well, 100%. And she's supposedly going to bring the balance to the Force, right?
Right.
So yeah, 100%. Yep. See, you can always think Star Wars and theology at the same time.
Yeah. All right. So those are some of the prophecies. That's some of the stuff that, again, it's there. It's verifiable. Right. But even with that, even knowing that there's these prophecies that are several hundred years old,
right?
And then we look at these, these claims of who Jesus was,
right?
And like, let's be frank, these claims of Jesus are pretty close to his birth,
right?
Like we're talking like some of these manuscripts are within 60 to 100 years of his birth.
Sure.
And so there's early claims of all of these things,
right?
Okay. However, there are some people in the world. I saw somebody say this the other night. These are the type of people that get their theology from the History Channel at 3 a.m. Right. That would tell you that Christmas is an adoption or a takeover of pagan traditions.
100%. Yep.
Yeah. Now, we talked a little bit about this with Easter.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about this with
Halloween, right?
And honestly, as we're doing this, I'm working through 2 Peter with Tommy,
right?
And like 2 Peter talks about people who are like this,
right?
Which is really amazing. But like people want to give you a reason to say, well, this isn't
right.
But if you do the research, if you do your own scholarship, and I don't mean like do your like not in the whole like, oh, I'm going to do my own medical research,
right,
kind of thing,
right?
And like even that though, like don't dismiss people who are just trying to better themselves.
Sure.
But if you find the sources, you'll see that historically there's no evidence that Christmas is borrowed from something else. There's no evidence.
I mean, Constantine obviously created it, but
we don't talk about Constantine.
No. I joke because I do think here's the thing: if you can discredit Jesus's birth as being divine, you begin to discredit the nature of Jesus. Right. It's the same way if you discredit the resurrection, you now discredit everything that's happened after the resurrection.
Right. But you kind of have to ignore all these prophetic things that we just talked about.
You 100% you have to.
Yeah.
Right. And you have to act like those are non-consequential. You know what I mean? Like this is part of the problem that I think that the Jewish folks have today who still don't accept Jesus as the Messiah is they see all of this overwhelming evidence. Well, most of the time I find they don't even know it. Like they know don't get me wrong, they know the scriptures, but they don't even know Jesus. Like they don't know that Jesus, oh really? Jesus was born in this town at this time. Like it's almost like they never read the New Testament, which makes sense because they stick in the old, and so, but for the Christian who recognizes these things, Christmas has always been a very important
Yes.
part, especially because Christmas, especially in the early church, is about life. I mean, so is Easter, but in life in the early church, if you look at early church art, really focused on this idea of birth and rebirth. And so, the only reason why I think people get to that point, like you said, of like, oh, well, this is, Constantine, or they don't say that, but they say it's pagan, is partly because birthdays aren't like, when we're talking in a 21st century term, like,
Right.
You know what I mean? Like birthdays back then, you didn't get presents, and there were no cakes, like, so
Right. But that's where these traditions came from.
it's because his birth was so important. Someone was like, holy cow, we need to write this down.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like that's the argument is, oh, it's pagan because no, like you're operating through a 21st century lens of something that happened literally at zero. you know what I mean? Like year zero. Yeah.
Well, and here's the thing. I think people who don't believe in Christ, people who don't believe in God, people
Sure.
who don't want it to be true,
Right.
and aren't willing to look at it objectively, they can easily take a look at that and say, "Oh, yeah, this sounds credible, so I'm going to believe that."
Sure.
The mistake, though, that I think we want to avoid as Christians is giving into that,
100%.
right? Because now, it is very trendy,
Right.
for Christians, especially in this day and age where everybody who can afford 2 microphones and a YouTube subscription
Right.
starts a podcast and talks about this kind of
100%. Yeah, sure.
So you'll see people all over the place who are Christians or just Christians, very concerned Christians that need you to hear what they have to say about it, who
Right.
sit in their car and take a video of themselves on their phone and then put it up on TikTok.
Right.
The best medium there is, obviously,
Is your steering wheel.
yes, your steering wheel. So they'll do that, and they'll talk about like how as Christians we need to be set apart,
Right.
not take part in these pagan practices of things like putting up a Christmas tree
Sure.
and doing
Sure.
decorations and all of that kind of stuff.
Right.
But in reality, none of that stuff is calling back to pagan practices.
Some of it actually, if you do the work in the history, you find that like they were like I know we're going to talk about some of this, but like if the Christmas tree is pagan, it's pagan. That's what you always hear in Roman and blah blah blah. Well, actually, the Holy Roman Empire is where Christmas trees kind of begin to come from, which was basically Germanic, right? That's who the Holy Roman Empire is before, so do your history. Oh, by the way, they were overwhelmingly Christian. You know what I mean? Like this wasn't a this wasn't like, oh, what are the Brits? What is their the Druids? This isn't like some Druid principle,
Right.
where people are dancing around a pole. Like, no, there's a lot that goes into this.
Ashtaroth,
Right? Exactly right. Yeah.
Well, here's the interesting thing. Like, so where a lot of historians are saying for Christmas tree, so they're not super positive on exactly where it came from.
Sure.
Which again is there is no evidence that comes from any pagan tradition, but like the first depiction is from 1576 in a place called Alsace, France, where where there was a
Sorry, I didn't know you were so fancy.
and there was a sculpture of one that somebody had on their private home. But there was also the first mention was in 1561. Again, it goes back to Alsace. And it was a city ordinance about the height of your Christmas tree. Right? So like that's the first and it was like it couldn't be more than 8 shoes high. So I guess 8 feet high. So some people also attribute it to Martin Luther or
Right.
Boniface or Boniface. Could have even
You are so fancy today, bro.
gotta hit every demographic, right? Here's one that I had never heard of too, but have you ever heard of a paradise tree?
Yeah.
So like the paradise tree was they had a paradise play.
Yep.
And the paradise tree was supposed to represent the tree in the garden.
Garden. I mean, yeah.
Right. And they would use these in these plays about
100%.
God. So it was a Christian tradition, and
Right.
there would be apples hung on them.
Yep.
Which were the first
Ornaments.
Ornaments.
100%.
and they always did these on the 24th of December.
Yep.
And and this was in England.
Right.
And what kind of tree could you get in the winter?
Right. It's an evergreen.
It's an evergreen.
Right.
Right. So, so like this could be a a part of that evolution of the modern Christmas tree.
Yep.
Came through a passion play.
Yeah.
Essentially, you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
100%. That, I mean, like I've always heard and been taught, like I said, like you said, it goes back to like that time of Luther. So like that's where we're looking at. So, and it's associated with, like you said, a passion play of paradise, where, like I said, this is the life theme that comes about, and birth and new birth. Advent wreaths are, I've heard, the early manifestation of a Christmas tree, right? It was branches bent together into a wreath with light, put the candles on it. We light the candles. Again, the idea is to, so yeah, like, I think you say it like, what is it? Causation isn't
Correlation isn't causation.
There you go. Yeah. And I think that nowhere do we, and this is important for people to understand, nowhere is there ever anything documented in writing from any of the church authors, anti-Nicene fathers of, Luther, any of them, that specifically say, hey, here's a tradition that I think we should, arguing for why we should start Christmas trees.
Those writings are in the basement of the Vatican.
Right. Yeah, obviously. Right. You know what I mean? But you see what I'm saying? Like, there's no, like,
But I say that in jest. But
sure,
this is the level of conspiracy theorists you have to be
100%
to believe some of these things.
100%.
And if you're not that type of conspiracy theorist, but you believe those things, it's because you're kind of being lazy in your scholarship.
100%, for sure.
So do you know why December 25th is the date?
I have some. I would like to hear your reasoning. Yeah.
Okay. Well, have you heard the conversation about like the typical belief that a prophet dies on the date of his conception?
Oh,
have you ever heard that?
No, I've never. That's interesting.
So this was just kind of a widely held belief, right?
Really? Sure. Okay.
Now, here's the truth about Jesus. We know exactly when he died.
Right.
Right. We've got everything lined up.
Yeah.
We know on the calendar when this would have happened.
It literally tells us. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So, what's 9 months from Easter?
Right.
Christmas.
It's Christmas.
Right. So they use that tradition to determine December 25th.
Well, so I've never actually heard that. So one of the things that I've always heard is if you go back and you look at the account where Elizabeth is told that she will conceive John.
Okay.
You can actually look through. So Elizabeth. Oh gosh, what's her husband's name?
The guy who couldn't speak.
Zachariah. Is it Zachariah?
Zachariah or it's not Zacchaeus.
No,
it's gotta be Zachariah.
He's in the tree. Not the Christmas tree. Let me pull it. Somebody. All right. Elizabeth's husband is a temple priest.
Yeah.
And so we actually have, there's somewhere in scripture, and I wish I would have pulled this up, but there's somewhere in scripture that actually tells us when he served in the temple, meaning these are the times that he was in for holy festivals. And these were the times that he was home from the holy, because although you served in the temple was in Jerusalem, right? Well, Elizabeth doesn't live in Jerusalem. The priests have to travel,
Yeah.
So I've actually heard that you can get really close within weeks, quote unquote, of Jesus's actual birth date based on the fact that we know that Mary conceives in this time, Elizabeth conceives at this time, John is this many months older than Jesus, meaning line them up. If you can find, but I think that's a really interesting, and that's another correlation, because here's two events now. So if you want to go the Elizabeth way, okay, there's one scientific way of discovering, and then if you go the theological kind of, hey, prophets die on their,
which is not theological, it's more of really is more of a superstition, but it's one that we know that was held.
But then there's a commonality between the two, right? So it's not just because I think that there's a lot of people who want to say, oh, June or whatever is when Jesus is really truly born. But even I did research when I did a sermon on this. The fact that shepherds were in the flock at night, out in the field, is a very and I can really get into this if we really need to, but I don't think we need to. But the fact that shepherds were out at night in their flock, in the open fields, the standard was to bring your flock in every night and to literally pen them, like to bring them back home. But in the months of December and in the months, like the winter months, you would leave them out because you had to go further out to get your to pasture, because
Right.
it's so yeah. So there's a lot, but the pagans just kind of throw. Well, this is the winter solstice, and so
Well, the big one, so the big claim. So we've just explained a number of traditions and understandings that we could take to say this is why it was determined.
Sure.
It's been a long-standing tradition that it was December 25th specifically.
sure,
The one that they always go back to is Yule.
right,
Right.
yeah.
So they'll say that Yule is, really we adopted and tried to take over Yule. Now, what's
Right.
interesting about that is Yule didn't have a date.
Right.
Yule moved based on lunar cycles.
Mm-hmm.
And this was explained to us by Pliny the Younger and St. Bede. There was no set date for Yule.
Right.
Right. Now, if you read a book called The History of the Kings of Norway, because this is kind of where Yule was,
Right.
you have King Hakon. And King Hakon is a confirmed Christian.
Right.
And he makes a decree. We are going to move Yule to always be coincided with Christmas, which was already
Existing. Right.
So Christmas wasn't like put there to take over Yule. They actually said, we're going to move Yule
Right.
to coincide with the
Right.
pre-existing
Right.
concept of
Just like with Easter, Christmas is not a sabotaging of secular culture.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of other things here that that we could get into. There's a lot of different things that we could break down. Things like, okay, Santa Claus is one that
Right.
Christians will tell you can't, because he's based on a pagan deity.
Right.
That's not true.
No.
So Santa Claus is not based on Odin. There are no sources that say he's stolen. He's based on Saint Nicholas.
Right.
Which this is the Dutch name. Santa Claus is the Dutch name, Saint Nicholas.
Right.
And so the feast day of St. Nicholas was originally on the 6th. And this would be, so December 6th, they would have the feast day of the 6th. Dutch immigrants in New York brought this tradition with them.
Right.
Right. So they would be there.
Right.
And it was, and it was because of that, Santa Claus was later reimagined as a modern Dutchman.
Right.
And that's why he looks the way he does.
Right. Right.
And he evolved from a Catholic saint, but it was later that it was like a radio host, or let me see if I've got this here. It was later that somebody turned around and said, "Oh, you know what I'm going to do though is I'm going to make him look like this existing deity."
Right.
But this is after he already exists.
Oh, and not only that, if you look in like Catholicism and you do your research on who Saint Nicholas was, he was like a patron saint of like orphans, like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, so like children and gift, and there are, like the saint stories, like there's a saint story about Saint Nicholas and this is what we've always taught our kids is like Saint Nick is Santa is Saint Nicholas. Like we celebrate not him, but what he would do is and again, this is the ethos, the myth, if you want to say, but like Saint Nicholas was like, no child should, like Christmas is a happy time. And like, so he focused on giving to kids gifts and things like,
and that's why St. Nicholas Day went away, and they moved it to coincide again with the birth of Christ celebration, because the birth of Christ celebration didn't really have that. And so
and that's why he was doing it. He was doing it because of the birth of Christ.
Right. So what these people in New York, what they determined was they're like, hey, well, this needs to be more of a family affair,
Right?
Because it's really become like kind of a drunken party thing,
right?
And that's not the spirit of Christ,
right.
So they moved the tradition of what they did on St. Nicholas Day, and they moved that to coincide with Christmas.
Right.
Which is why you give your kids gifts.
Right.
And like that. So again, we can track every single tradition that we've done.
100%.
To something or pretty close to something.
Sure.
But there is no evidence that any of those things came from pagan things. So like, here's the deal. We should not take on pagan practices.
No.
I mean, the Bible tells us it's a bad idea. We know it's a bad thing. We shouldn't do that. But like we talked about this in the Halloween episode, and we talked about it in the Easter episode. That's not what is happening with this.
Right.
And it's also like you can't. I heard somebody talk about this too. You can't accidentally worship a pagan god.
Right.
You know what I mean?
For sure.
Like to understand, if you understand what worship is,
Right.
But you can't accidentally worship somebody else.
Right.
Right. So like, there's really not a way to even say that this is what you're doing is worshiping something other than God.
Well, in order to, I think there's we kind of touched a little bit on Halloween, and so we can kind of touch on it a little bit here with the idea of like demonic. Okay, like if these practices are pagan and demonic, right, inviting ill spirits or whatever it may be, like don't you have to intentionally invite the spirit?
You really do.
You know what I mean? So like, I mean, like here's a good example of a Christmas one that Christians don't really do. Like, what is his name? Like Krampus. You know what I mean? Like he is a uniquely, I would say, pagan. It's a I don't know, Germanic or Norse myth of like stealing children. You know, like.
Well, I got some notes. He's a minor Christmas character from parts of Europe. He was depicted as a furry goat-like creature. He originates in Austria and Bavaria.
There you go.
Yeah. And some of these, he wasn't even really Christmassy. He was actually kind of depicted. His depiction is based on like an earlier depiction of Satan.
Right.
And he was a child terror figure. So think of it meant to be the opposite of Santa. So think of like Grimm's fairy tales.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Right? The idea was to give some kids something to be afraid of.
Right.
To make them scared to do the wrong thing.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but again, like that, I don't know too many Christians.
And that's a folk tradition.
Exactly.
Not a pagan tale.
Sure. Yeah.
Like they never believed he was real.
Right.
And they didn't worship him.
Right. 100%. Right.
It was a bogeyman story.
Right.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. So that's the thing. So, I mean, if we want to apply that same deal, then we have to really investigate what we do in Christianity. Like pagans had temples.
Right.
So can we have a church?
Right.
Pagans had festivals and calendar events.
Right.
So can we have none of those things?
Right. Literally the whole calendar is based on Christian events.
Right.
Like the Western world. Yeah.
Yeah. The cross was a pagan torture device.
Right.
So can we not hang that up in the church?
Right.
And this is really a great thing is I think the cross is really the best example of this, of what God does. Mm-hmm. He takes everything and it bows to him.
Sure. 100%.
So here is this device meant for torture and execution, invented by pagans.
Right.
And used on Jesus for proclaiming that he is the
King. Right.
As opposed to Caesar.
Right.
And it is now the symbol for his divinity.
100%. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like talk about like God's divine
right.
humor.
You just, it's funny in a roundabout way, you just created more reason to throw out the cross from the church than you did anything else. You know what I mean? Like, so, I mean, are you willing to do that? You know,
right.
like
willing to get rid of the cross.
Right.
Because that's kind of what we're saying. Well, every time you put a cross up there and you kneel before it and
pray,
are you worshiping the torture device?
Sure.
You're not, because what is in your heart?
100%.
You're worshiping what God did on that
100%.
cross.
Right.
And how he overcame that cross.
Right.
Right. That's why it's become such a powerful symbol.
Well, and if you tie it into Christmas, right? That's the anti-Christmas is materialism. It's, it's the hustle and the bustle of the season, right? That's what every pastor preaches on every year, right? Christmas is not that. That's the quote unquote pagan, like giving gifts to your kids. That's not pagan. Like we just said, that kind of originates out of.
And Jesus said, you being good parents, you would give good gifts. You wouldn't give your kids bad gifts.
Yeah, right.
Giving gifts to your kids is a good thing.
It's a good thing, right? So it's when we overemphasize the wrong parts of Christmas, right?
Yes.
And that goes back to kind of like that idea of the Christmas movie. What's your favorite Christmas? Like if Christmas becomes this, and we're talking about this right now, actually, like if Christmas becomes the season and not the Savior, you've missed it, and that's because it's always been not about the season. That's the pagan side, right? The season, it's about the Savior, and Christmas has always been about Jesus.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. So I think that really gets us to this last point I have on here, which is, why do we celebrate Christmas? We just kind of explained that.
Sure.
We celebrate Christmas because it's a mile marker. It's a milestone in, not just in the Christian faith.
Right.
Because that's to suggest that the Christian faith is just one way to do things. Like the history of the universe, this is a milestone marker.
Right.
Right.
Time literally changes. I mean, like the way, and you can him and ha about it all you want, but like BC and AD, they used to mean, they've changed it to BCE, before the Common Era. They took the C and changed what it used to mean before Christ, and then Addio Domini, which was after Christ. And so literally time change. I mean, and it's interesting, which and this is what always confused me, especially even in like seminary and undergraduate school, was like, time is based on his birth, not his death. So the cross changed. Don't get me wrong. The cross changes everything, but we literally said his birthday is going to change our time. That is year zero now. Like everything before was leading up to Jesus. Everything after Jesus's birth is leading up to his return.
Yeah, I appreciated it. I heard Neil deGrasse Tyson talk about that, where they changed BC and AD, and he was like, I still use them.
Right.
And he was like, A, because I've always used them. He goes, but B, we should, and I appreciated this coming from him. He said, we should honor the, what the church and what people of faith have done for science.
Sure.
He's like, yeah, that was their motivation for creating these calendars, but these calendars are good.
Right. Right. 100%. Right. And I think but that just goes to show you how important that day really is.
Yeah.
Is that everything changes. We change our entire calendar. And it's really interesting. Our entire calendar year arguably builds up to that moment, right? To December 25th. Because then after it, you've got New Year, and it starts like that is the pinnacle moment of even the year, is it leads up, every year leads up to Jesus's birth.
Yeah, because that's the beginning of the change. That's
Right.
the beginning of the end.
It's
So I think too something.
It was a real brutal statement. It's real metal. It's the beginning of the end.
Jesus. All right, so man, so talking about brutal music, there's a song called "Lower Still" by a band called My Epic. I don't know if you've ever.
I know. I've never heard. No.
And they're kind of on the harder
Sure.
core scene, but they start with this concept of Jesus being born in the manger,
Right.
and like basically being laid down where pigs would come eat,
Right.
and like everything that's around him, like he's in like the filthiest place,
Right.
and everything around him is kind of seemingly also unaware that he holds together the universe,
Right. For sure. Yeah.
and if you know that that's what he is, that he is this penultimate,
Right.
you would say this is not a fitting place for him.
Right.
This is not a place for a king. And from there he does what? He goes on and surrounds himself with tax collectors,
Right.
fishermen, and thieves.
The most deplorable. Yes.
And what does he do to them?
Right.
He washes their feet.
Right.
Right. And then they take him and they force him to crawl through the street and they beat him.
Right.
And as they're recounting the life of Jesus, starting with that birth,
Right.
they keep saying he has to go lower still until he gets put in the ground.
Right. Sure.
But the song ends with this lyric that the earth cannot contain him.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And he then goes and he is now seated in the heavenlies at the right hand of the Father.
Right.
And all heads now must bow lower still, which brings it back
Right.
to the,
Right.
so that because it's an art form.
Sure.
And like, so for me, that's the thing that I really, that really resonates for me about when I think about Christmas, when I think about what Jesus did at Christmas time, that God became man.
Right.
And he didn't become some debutante, some,
Right.
political figure.
Right.
He became a man in the poorest sense.
Right. In the most humbling sense.
In the most humbling
Yes.
sense. The humility of God is astounding. And I think
For sure.
I think that is such an important part of the Christmas celebration, is to remember that while we were yet sinners,
Right.
he did this. And I think too, like if you juxtapose it with Easter, right?
Right.
Okay, so no greater love is this, that a man lay his life down for his friends.
Right.
So we used to talk about this when I was younger, is like, would you die for Christ?
Right,
Would you be
right.
willing to die for Christ?
Right.
For me, that kind of became the Peter conversation.
Right. Sure.
Of like,
do you love me? Yeah.
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 But like Peter, like, and I've said this on the podcast, Peter was ready to kill for Christ. He wasn't ready to die
Die for us. Right. Sure.
Right. I think that we shifted, especially in like an American sense, because there's no true threat of death for us.
Right. Right.
That we say, oh, we would die for Christ in a heartbeat. And you know,
For sure.
I really believe that about myself. I believe that I would have no problem dying for Christ tomorrow.
Right.
Right. If somebody walked in here and they did the whole, and like I used to hear there was a lot of rhetoric.
Right.
Put a gun to your head.
Right.
Oh yeah, I'd be a Christian.
Yeah.
And then they, blow your head off.
Yeah.
Not a problem.
Sure.
Can I live 30 years of righteousness?
Right.
That's what Jesus did.
Right.
He lived 30 years of sinless, blameless life
Right.
for you when you were still saying, God, I don't love you.
Right.
Right? He was willing to do that.
Yeah.
I find it incredibly more challenging to live for Christ than to die for Christ.
100%.
And I think, but that's what the birth of Christ was about.
For sure.
He lived for you.
For you. Right.
Right. And we get
Right.
back to that tie-in of the agape love
Right.
conversation. So for me, that's what I try to remember at Christmas is like, this is where the beginning of the end started.
Sure.
And now he reigns victorious
Right.
over all things.
Well, and it puts this is also why Christmas is so important, because I think it puts the entire life of Christ, which is our life that we're called to live, into context, right? Because you just said juxtapose that. Like, let's just put it this way. Put yourself in the shoes of the two people that are looking for Jesus on the day of Jesus' birth. The shepherds and the magi, the
Right.
wise men. Okay. The shepherds are out in their flock. It's dark, and I always think like this had to be the scariest thing in the whole wide world. You're on the flock. You're already vulnerable, right? Because we now know, like I just said, like if you look at the December months, you're out in the field, you're vulnerable. It's night. There's sheep. You're a shepherd. It's a dangerous job. There's things out there that want to eat them. And we all know that those predators tend to do better at night than they do during the day. So like this is a vulnerable time. And then suddenly a whole host of heavenly angels. Like it doesn't say like Gabriel appeared,
Right.
Gabriel he's a good looking guy, that's what usually that we don't know that, but like, that's kind of the vibe is like, oh my gosh, it's Gabriel. And everybody's still in shock. Now imagine a whole magnitude of heavenly hosts appear. It's pitch black. And suddenly they say it's so bright that they're like, oh my gosh, I can't see. Okay. And they're told to go find this king, a baby that's born in a manger. And they're like, okay, well, that makes no sense. And then they go find the king, the savior of the world, like you just said, in a pig trough, for lack of a better word.
Mm-hmm.
Like that must have been confusing. Right. But right off the bat, Jesus is teaching us a lesson.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then the Magi who see the king's star. That's why they go searching, because they say a king has been born. And they're like, we need to go give gifts because this is the king. And so they go to find this king. And then I imagine, like, granted, they're not in a stable at that. We don't know where they're at, but we know they're probably, it's not that night. So we know they're probably back at home somewhere. So, but they go to the home of a humble carpenter, not a huge castle. So they find the King of Kings, quote unquote, this king who's going to change the world that they're searching for, in a carpenter's home. You know what I mean? Like, how humbling is that? Like,
It's pretty humbling. Yeah, I think too it's a statement of their faith because, like, have you ever done like a really complicated mathematical equation and been like, I'm not sure about this answer?
No, because I can't do math.
Okay, well, so this is happening. This happened to me. Okay, so you do really and you're like, I think this is the answer.
Sure. Oh yeah.
But because you did all of the steps correctly,
Right.
even if the answer looks wrong, it's the right
Right.
answer.
You still have faith in it. Right.
And this is the faith of that is understanding, like, when angels appeared to them.
Right.
And then they get there and they're like, this isn't what I expected.
Right.
But I know who sent me.
100%.
Right. And the Magi were like, this may not have been what I expected, but I know the signs that I read.
Sure.
Right. So
Sure.
like that's faith.
Well, for sure. And we know they had faith, right? Because it says that the shepherds went off praising. So they believed. It wasn't like, oh, whoops, we don't believe him. And it's the Magi obviously believed enough to disregard Herod's request to come back.
Yeah.
So clearly these are two people who, even in spite of what they saw and their expectations, still believe. But I think that's the testament of what Christmas is, right? And I think that's, if you want to get like anti-Christmassy or whatever, you know what I mean, like worldly here, I think that to me is where we sabotaged it, or where the world sabotaged it, right? Is to make it, Christmas was such a non-materialistic moment. Yeah. It literally is the moment that changed to zero. Everything in time surrounds this one moment in history. But yet we've turned that one moment into history, into this huge marketing. And I was talking to Carly about this. I love Christmas music, right? And I have my rules about Christmas music and things like that. And we were both talking about how, isn't it crazy? Like if you go back and you look at all the Christmas music and all the music we sing and all of the things, very little Christmas music was written, like Jingle Bells and all those things. Like mass produced actually comes around of Christmas after around World War II is when Christmas music really, the way we understand it, like on the radio, like Last Christmas, obviously,
Yeah.
they were in the 80s, so Simply Having a Wonderful Time, which has the worst timed keyboard in all of history, that's Paul McCartney. So, but a lot of the Christmas music we sing is modern. Most of the Christmas music that we don't sing or that we sing hymn wise, that
It's ancient.
Ancient. You know what I mean? And so look at the shift though, right? Like what you hear on the radio is not Christmas.
It's that shift to that materialism. I mean, like
Right.
you go watch a classic, any kind of new Christmas movie.
Sure.
I think there's a lot of them out there. Maybe Jingle All the Way.
Yeah.
Things like this. There's always
100%.
there's always kind of this moral that they get back to of like the materialism isn't what it's about.
Right.
Not to get too philosophical or
Sure.
deep into apologetics here.
Right.
Atheists are materialists.
For sure.
The further you get away, and maybe not like in the sense that I'm talking about, but it's
Right.
only the material matters
100%.
because it's the only thing that you can feel, touch, and prove. Right.
Right.
The further you get away from God, the only thing you have
Mm-hmm.
are the materialistic.
Right.
And that's why the further Christmas gets away from God,
Mm-hmm.
and every time Starbucks takes Jesus off their cups, I'm just kidding. You know what I'm saying?
Right, sure.
But this is why Christians have an uproar about this,
Right?
is because they understand what's happening. The more you take the Christ out of Christmas,
Right.
the more it becomes about consumerism and materialism.
Right.
But that's not what it's about for us.
Right. But and this is where I think we as Christians have to kind of cool it. Like,
Yes.
and I mean this in a loving way. Like, you're not going to rob me of Jesus.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if Starbucks does that. No, great. Yeah, should they? No. It doesn't matter what I see on TV or what like you're not going to, as long as I personally keep in perspective and I continue to proclaim that.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter, and so, but I think like you kind of talked about it just like a hair earlier there is like the further away we get from Christ in Christmas, the more it becomes materialistic. That is the atheism is Gnosticism. It's just a new Gnosticism. And because Gnosticism was all about the material, right? The material, they said materialism is bad. And by material, like your body is bad, because Gnosticism was all about wisdom.
Well, it's the same, but it's the opposite at
It's
the same time.
exactly right.
But it's the only thing for the new atheist agnostic.
Right.
It's the material is all you have. So
Exactly.
it has to be the only good.
It's exactly right. It's Gnosticism flipped backwards. Like where the wisdom, the secret knowledge is now that there is no God.
Yeah.
So the material is all we have, and it's the temporary. And so and I think that notice with every religious celebration that we talked about so far. And I mean, even Halloween, right? We can even go to Halloween and say it was sort of a religious All Saints Day, Halloween is the day before All Saints Day, all of those things. Easter, obviously, aliens obviously created Easter. So, but all of those things, if you look at what the world does, is the world tries to separate and discredit the one thing that truly matters, which is Jesus, which no material whatsoever. They all say it's all about material. Easter's all about material. Halloween's all about material. Christmas is all about material. But no, it's all about a Messiah. And I think that's why there are some Christian faiths who don't celebrate Christmas. And I know that sounds weird, but it's because they so attribute the material to this moment. But it's the Messiah.
Yeah, and I think to your point, we as Christians can cool it on some of that outrage we have.
Sure,
but we should still understand it. We should still have.
Well, we still have to proclaim it,
and we have to proclaim who Christ is. So we can understand what happens when Christ gets taken out of it,
right?
But we don't need to lead a revolution about making people who don't believe in Christ say Christ necessarily. Do you know what I mean?
There's a rapper. That Christian rapper, and they're getting better. And he's kind of whatever. But I heard him say the other day, it could be a rapper myself here. I heard him say the other day, we need to keep Christ in Christmas, but can they see Christ in the Christian? And I think that's the moral, right? Like, yeah, I'm all for keeping Christ in Christmas. Don't get me wrong. Like, if you take Christ out, you just got Mass, like you just got more. That's it. There's what, so you need to keep Christ in Christmas, but we as Christians have to remember that we have to keep Christ in ourselves. Like this, and this is what we've been talking about here at church for this Advent season is like, if you don't, if it's not about the Savior and you don't have the Savior and it's in your and you're not focused on the Savior, you're missing it. Like that, because that's what it's not the season, it's not the songs, it's not the music. Like we are celebrating the birth of a game changer.
Yeah.
For not just this life, but all life, eternity,
Yeah.
And that's why we celebrate it, right? Because if you had something, you just go back to what you just said about, like, if you had a gift and you're a parent, like, you give good gifts. You wouldn't give, when they ask for food, you wouldn't give them a rock, right? That's what it says. Like, and what is the other one? Like, when you you wouldn't give them a snake. Like, it's I can't remember but the first one's, if you ask for bread, you wouldn't give them rock. Like, you would celebrate the good. And that's what we are celebrating the single best thing.
Yeah.
Aside from the resurrection, right? And that's what I always go back and forth with Christians is, right? Those are the two pinnacles.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you at home, if you're listening or watching this on YouTube, as you sit down with your family,
right,
to celebrate Christmas, celebrate the holidays, take some time to remember what this is about.
Sure.
Share it with your family. I used to struggle with that. It always felt so cheesy or corny, but
sure.
But that was because something was wrong with my heart.
Sure.
But so take some time to remember Christ, remember what he did, remember how he humbled himself, and take a moment to worship him.
100%.
Absolutely. Now, we talked a little bit about the people who visited Jesus. You know who the holiest person was that visited Jesus? The little drummer boy.
Dude, I knew you were going to say that. Because the only gift he could bring was the beats.
The only gift he could bring was the beats. Not by Trey. So first you have to have the setting, right?
Right.
You have to have the Christmas setting. So that, in that sense, Die Hard and Home Alone are on the same, because you're in the Christmas season for that.
Right.
But the second part is there needs to be a focus on the importance of that season or the feelings of that season.
Right.
Now, it's really hard. Like, you can see it pretty clearly in Home Alone.
Right.
So, okay, family, camaraderie, celebrating Christmas.
Right.
He goes to the church and has that talk with the old man.
He decorates. I mean, it's way more Christmassy. Yeah.
So there's a lot of Christmas elements to it. Now, you could say, though, that John McClane came to L.A.,
yeah.
right? And to
for a Christmas party. I mean, they were having a Christmas party.
For a Christmas party.
Right.
Where people were doing non-Christmas related things. But he did it because he loved his wife.
Right.
And he was trying to reconcile with his wife.
Right.
Right. So you could say that he understood the spirit of Christmas in a sense of
murder. Yes.
Yeah. He was willing to kill everyone in that power for his wife.
I mean, well, but I think you have to be willing to accept the argument that Die Hard is a Christmas movie based on the premise that Home Alone is a Christmas movie, right? Because so, like,
how?
So I think you nail a couple of things. Setting is important. So I think, like I said, because Die Hard begins with the whole Christmas movie vibe, like it's a Christmas party that immediately, gets taken over by terrorists, and is that Hans Gruber? Is that the guy? Yeah.
That's a great name.
What a great name. And so, I think. Well, so okay. So what constitutes? So this okay. So let's take this a step further then, just to tease this all the way out. What constitutes a Christmas movie? So like Charlie Brown Christmas.
Okay,
that's a Christmas movie.
Yeah. Well,
literally, it's in the title,
and it culminates to a explanation of what.
I mean, it's probably the most explicitly Christmas movie because it actually literally uses the Bible and talks about that's what Christmas is about. Charlie Brown, So definitely, I'd say that no one debates is Charlie Brown Christmas a Christmas movie. But like then you get movies like the Krampus, like horror movies. Like, can horror movies be Christmas movies? Because same idea, Christmas party, Christmas spirit, we're all there.
Right. But those are the settings of it.
Right.
Is that the spirit of it?
Sure.
And I think that's where you have to get back to the spirit of it. Now, it's easy, like if you want to be a legalist and say it has to follow this formulaic thing, but we walk in the spirit and we have to be
I'm pretty legalistic about my Christmas movies. I'm going to let you know right now.
You have to be able to divine, like, what's the message behind this? So, like, what's the message of a horror movie? Like, specifically,
is okay. Let me make it not okay. So yeah, obviously the message is
it very rarely feels like a message of hope and love and goodwill towards man.
So what is the movie where every time a bell rings, an angel gets its wings? What's that movie?
Oh, that's gosh dang it.
What is it? I know, right?
A Wonderful Life.
Wonderful. Is that a Christmas movie?
That's a great question.
Because there's no murder in that one. Well, I guess technically the guy is dead. The angel that's there, he's gone, but he didn't get murdered. It's in Christmas. It's at Christmas,
Happens during Christmas time.
and it is all about the idea of camaraderie, family. They all bring him money at the end. Then they sing,
Community,
community. I have grown up historically saying, no, that's not a Christmas movie, because I am very Christmas legalistic about said movies.
What makes that not a Christmas movie?
Because I think this is what makes it centers on the event of Christmas itself. So Home Alone has a better argument of being a Christmas movie because it all culminates, right, on Christmas and Christmas Eve, right? That's where he beats the bad guys. That's where, it's centered around literally the December 24th, 25th day. I don't think somewhere in like Die Hard is, because it doesn't. The day is completely pointless.
Well, yeah, I think that's where you have to look at it and say, does it survive the critical eye?
Right.
If you remove the Christmas setting from it.
Right, because even Home Alone 2, right? I mean, he gets lost again.
Well,
How DFS hasn't gotten involved in Home Alone yet, I don't know.
Die Hard happened during Christmas until I first heard this debate, because I hadn't watched
Sure.
Die Hard when I was younger.
Sure.
I ended up watching it later, but like I watched it. I can't think of a singular Christmas thing about it.
That's what I'm saying.
Right.
It's the only idea is that it's Christmas season, right?
Right.
That's it. But this could have happened at any time, right? You know what I mean? You take Christmas out of. See, that's what I'm saying. If you took that element out of it, would it be a Christmas movie? No,
Right.
Of course not. But if you took the element out of that at Home Alone, of course, because he uses the decorations to fake a party.
Yes.
Right, you know what I mean. Or
Christmas is a key element to the plot.
or It's a Wonderful Life. Yes, he doesn't have the money. They're going to go bankrupt, and it's Christmas time.
Right.
But that could have happened in July. You know what I mean? Like, so that's my thing is.
But people wouldn't have felt charitable in July.
Right? No, they wouldn't. They would have felt patriotic. So,
Right.
so that I think that's
You're an American. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
That's right. Yeah, that's actually, it wouldn't be them coming back with the money. It'd be the bank coming in to foreclose on them.
This is ours now.
Yeah, but I will say it does have. It's a Wonderful Life does have the theme of generosity, right? He's in that.
Yes.
He's in that particular place because he's generous, and I think that is a Christmas theme. So I don't know.
Another aspect of it too, though, is that it connects you to the divine.
Sure. Sure. For sure.
It's similar to like A Christmas Carol,
Right.
which like there's this connection to the divine,
Right.
And it happens to occur during Christmas,
Right.
Right, but divinity, is the purpose of Christmas,
100%. Right.
So like I think that element too kind of lends itself to it becoming a Christmas movie, especially when you set it during a Christmas season.
Right. Well, and that I mean.
Terrible theology, by the way, though. In that,
Yeah.
so like an angel gets its wings.
Wings, right? Yeah, it has to earn itself. Like,
God made incomplete angels.
Yeah, right.
It's like-
Right. Well, and that humans become angels, like in the sense that the Bible talks about angels. We are separate.
We're different.
So yeah, I know terrible theology. See, yet another reason why it shouldn't be a Christmas movie. Now, Christmas Vacation, obviously, Christmas movie. Is there actually any mention of Jesus in that movie? I'm trying to think.
Probably only in taking his name and vain.
Probably. Oh my God.
There's a comment I think in that one where Uncle Eddie, crazy Uncle Eddie, and they're like shopping and he's low on money and he says something like, "I wish I had that money back that we gave to that televangelist."
He did. That ran off with all the hockey player. Yeah. And then he says, "Well, what about the kids?" He's like, "I don't care about their kids." He's like, "No, you're a kid." Yeah. Oh man, I'm trying to. Yeah, I don't know.
All right,
Anyway, well, that's a good Christmas debate right there.
it is. All right, I did.